I love history, and especially that of invention. Since the arrival of Africans and African descended people here in Boston in 1638, we have had Black invention on these shores. The innovators that arrived many times did not have their names announced. They did not have the wherewithal to be able to secure patents. We hear names like Banneker, Grant, Latimer, even Brown. Some names we have not heard, like Onesimus. He was the one who introduced inoculation here as an African in the 1700s. Banneker, the clock. We have innovators that have not been recognized, but we shall have an innovator today that we will. There was a law that even forbid the patents for enslaved Africans to be received. When we think about what is a patent is allowing the promotion and the process and the progress of art, of science, and useful arts for the protection of the author, the writer, or the inventor to use time allotted for that patent to be able to be licensed and to use it for sale. So when you are enslaved, you are property. So you may not have that right to do that. In fact, there was a commissioner, a U.S. patent commissioner, who made sure in 1857 that those who were enslaved would be denied the patent. Despite that, we have had free African Americans born. Even before that law came about, after the patent law of 1790 was announced, there was a man who was born the next year, 1791, who receives a patent as the first African American to receive a patent in 1821. His name was Thomas Jennings. He received it for a dry scouring, cleaning process. We all have on clothes today, and many of us have used dry cleaning. When we think about that, it is Thomas Jennings who came up with that process. He used the money from that patent to absolutely purchase his family. So when we connect this idea of innovation and inventiveness with freedom in America, we have to look at what has slavery produced and how has this democratic process evolved with invention for those who have been denied its access. So as we move forward, there's a particular and peculiar circumstance in Massachusetts that happens to give us one of our most inventive and creative geniuses in America. It is Lewis Latimer that I am referring to, but the circumstances of his birth were not so smooth. His father was enslaved in Virginia. He escaped, self-liberated, self-emancipated, and ran to Boston in the 1840s as a way to be free. Once here, he was working, and his former enslaver, Mr. Gary, heard that he was here and came to capture him. He was returned to Virginia. The citizens of Massachusetts were enraged, and they decided that no one should be able to come to a free territory like Massachusetts and claim an enslaved, formerly enslaved person. And so they rallied, they met, and they created a petition that amassed 66,000 signatures. The petition even weighed 150 pounds. Can you imagine? It forced the Massachusetts legislature to pass a Personal Liberties Act in 1842. And so this Latimer petition was called the Great Massachusetts Petition. 6 years later, Lewis Latimer is born. George and Rebecca Latimer moved to Chelsea, Massachusetts, after George Latimer's freedom was purchased for $400 from Mr. Gary, and they began a family. Louis was born in 1848, and he was a bright child, industrious. He finished high school and went on to the U.S. Navy. After his service in the Navy and honorable discharge, he decided to work in Boston. He was hired by a patent solicitor firm in Boston, Cater and Gould, and he was hired as an office boy in that room. He began to learn about drafting and drawing, and eventually, in a very short time, as a matter of fact, he became a draftsman. He was so expert in his drafting that he gained the use of the office for his own practice, and he was hired by Alexander Graham Bell to then do renderings of the telephone. Those actual drawings helped him to even improve the telephone. Thomas Edison heard about him and had him to do drafting of his invention of the light bulb, and it is here that we meet Latimer as an inventor who then establishes this use of a carbon filament to elongate the electric light. His first patent, you can see pictured here, was a water trough for the railroad car, and that first patent was 1874. His other patents ranged from 1881 to 1882, which gave not only a incandescent light bulb and its length in burning, but a support for the globe of the light bulb. He is accredited with at least 7 patents in his life, and as he is going on in his career, he is hired by the U.S. Electric Company. He is then installing the lights in cities like New York, Philadelphia, Montreal, and London. He's on the board of the Thomas Edison Electric Company, and he joins General Electric in 1894. Here you see his picture with others who are on in that company, including women. I thought this was a very special photograph. As we look at his work, he was a man of science and of literature. He wrote The Incandescent Electric Lighting. He wrote this volume of science that helps others to understand the electric process and lighting, and yet he is not cornered or metered by that. He also has eloquence in words in a poem that I found that he wrote to his wife called Ebony Venus. And so we have a very magic man, I think, in the body of Louis Latimer, who is only an example of the African genius and creativity of the innovator and innovators that had not been recognized in the history and the narrative of what we see in America and the world, to raise the voice of the African American in all branches of life. So it is my pleasure to look out at you and see light, to look up and see light, to be in Kendall Square and see light. And every time I see light, I'm going to think of Louis Latimer, and I hope you will too. Thank you very much.